Howdy! I'm known as Dimwit, the last mountain man, feared throughout the land. And it's another day here in paradise, and you're in for a bit of a history lesson. This gun I'm holding here served in the American Civil War, and then it actually took part in two invasions of Canada in the hands of Irish American immigrants. And the first time it did that was as a muzzleloader, just like it was in Civil War, and then it was converted into a cartridge gun, the Needham conversion. And I'll let you have a closer look at it some more, but I think we need to shoot it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these Irish immigrants. And I made some cartridges for it. They're not historically accurate, but they're still functional, I hope. This is going to be another video ain't been shot in a century, so I never used this gun before, and we'll see how it goes. I just to be safe, I think I'm gonna put some more modern glasses on just to protect my eyes. Okay. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn my chronograph on. Ooh. And that was an error. So I don't know what kind of velocity we're getting, but it was 70 grains of black powder, and it was a little bit of a recoil, not terrible, but enough to make it interesting. And I got some more here with 80 grains in them, and so they're gonna kick even more. But let's talk a little bit about these Irish war veterans. A couple of years before the American Civil War, they started an organization called the Fenian Brotherhood. And that was kind of the sister organization of what later became IRA, I guess you could say. And they were kind of trying to liberate Ireland from England. They wanted Ireland to be a free and independent nation and not controlled by the English. Sounds familiar. And some of them joined the Civil War in America just to get military practice, so they could fight the English. And when the American Civil War, the Irish were the largest portion of immigrants in the U.S. There was a lot of them. And a lot of them, I think, had to fight in the Civil War in order to stay there and get a citizenship. And I'm not sure. But then, after the Civil War, these battle-hardened veterans, they had a hard time adjusting to modern or civilian life. It sounds familiar. And they got the uniforms, and they had parades, and they bought 5,000 of these surplus guns from the American Civil War. And they would hold speeches and raise money and do everything they could to support the Irish liberation. And they did what Irish do best, I guess. They'd sit around the campfire and drink whiskey. And you know, these were battle-hardened war veterans, and they get bored with this civilian life. So and these speeches and parades, that was getting kind of boring after a while. So I got this great idea. Why don't we invade Canada? You take Canada as a hostage and force that bitch Queen Victoria to give Ireland its freedom. Well, I'm not sure how much whiskey you need to drink to come up with that idea, but there was this other guy. Well, there's only one problem. Canada is an awful big place. Yeah. And so what they finally agreed upon was to attack some of the border fortresses that Canada had. So they went up there to the Canadian border, and they crossed the border in several places, and they attacked several of these forts in May and June of 1866. And they caused quite a bit of problems for the Canadian militia that didn't have any battle experience. But like that guy said, Canada's a big place, a lot of people up there, and so they were eventually forced to surrender and disarmed, and they were handed over to American authorities. But you know, the American authorities, they made them sign and promise that they wouldn't do this again, and they gave them back their guns and even bought them a train ticket home. So, but it's important to remember that the English weren't really that popular in America at that time, because a grown man like me at that time would maybe have a father that fought the English in the War of 1811, and he could have a grandpa that would have fought the English in the American Revolutionary War. And this was right after the American Civil War, and the English had supplied the rebels with a lot of guns, so they weren't really that popular. So that's what happened. And so they kept on doing what they had been doing, and after a while, you know, you remember that time I went over Canadian border? Why don't we do it again? They never learn Irish, and these other guys. Well, there's only one problem. The Canadians, they got these Snyder cartridge guns now. We'll never be able to beat them. And he was right. The Canadian had Snyder cartridge guns, and so they had to come up with something. So they decided to convert their muzzleloaders into cartridge guns, and for somehow they managed to get an English company called Needham to come over from England to Trenton, New York, and convert these guns into cartridge guns. That was pretty much treason for those English gunsmiths, and I think Queen Victoria would have loved to stretch their necks a little bit, but that's what they did, and so they decided to try again, and they did in 1870. And of course, they had been drinking again, and what happens when you start drinking whiskey? You can't keep your mouth shut. So this guy, you know, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but you gotta promise not to tell anyone. We're gonna go up to Canada and try it once again. So the Canadians knew they were coming, and they had a lot of guys ready for them. So there were people getting killed just like the first time, but not quite as many. And they were disarmed and handed over to American authorities again. And this time they didn't get their guns back. I'm not even sure they got a train ticket. The guns were put in storage and they were later on sold at auction. And most of them were bought by this surplus firearms dealer company called Schuyler, Hartley and Graham. And last time they had them in their catalog was in 1920. So 5,000 of these were bought as surplus after the Civil War, and it's believed that all of them were converted. And the ones that were smuggled up to the Canadian border that second time, they dismantled the guns and they put them in crates so nobody could figure out, would understand it was guns. And of course the wood on a gun like this is almost as long as the gun itself. So what they did is they cut the wood here underneath that barrel band. I don't know if you can see that. So, and that was not done with the ones that were kept in storage down at Trenton. So this has been used in the American Civil War, and it's invaded Canada twice. And now it's mine, and you guys get to see it. But I think that's about enough talk. Let's try to shoot it some more. That first cartridge was 70 grains of black powder, 2F, and I got one here with 80 grains that should kick a little more. Let's see. I don't think we can count on my chronograph today. It still says error, but we'll try. Oh, it worked. 1,231 feet per second. And that's with 60 caliber round ball. And that's a heavy cartridge, so that's not too bad. And of course we got the black powder residue starting to, even after 2 shots, it's noticeable. It's not like a modern gun. Let's shoot one more, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the ammo I'm using and what I've done to be able to shoot this thing. So one more. Oh yeah. Okay. It's a 50. Of course, it's a 58 caliber gun, just like it was when it was a muzzleloader, and the cartridge, the original cartridge, is called 58 musket, and this is not it. This is actually a 24 gauge shotgun shell that has been shortened a little bit, and the chamber of the gun has been opened up a little bit, and the reason I did that was because you can buy 58 musket brass, but they're awful expensive, and there seems to be variations of them, so it would be expensive, and I wouldn't be sure if it would fit. And also I would have to buy a bullet mold. That would be quite expensive. So but these 24 gauge shotgun shells, they're pretty cheap and easy to come by, and what I use is a 60 caliber round ball in here, and that seals very well in that 58 caliber rifle barrel. It should be pretty accurate, and what I do, let's see. I put the powder down in there first, of course, and then I put a piece of waxed card that I knock out from milk cartons. And I have these things in different sizes that I use for that. And then I also knock out these pieces of beeswax. So I stick that down in there, and then the bullet on top of that. And that bullet fits very loosely inside this shell. So what I do, I melt some more of this beeswax and I pour it in there. And let's see if you can, I'm not sure if you can see that properly or not, but there's the round ball down in there with some beeswax. And that's just a simple and inexpensive way to make cartridges for something like this. And I'm excited to see what kind of accuracy I can get from this. And there's a room for quite a bit more powder in there, and I think from the recoil and from the velocity, I think I could probably use some more powder in there and still be on the safe side. So I'm gonna enjoy this, and I might make another video with this gun and show you how it performs on paper later on. But this is it for now, and very interesting gun. It's a lot like a Springfield trapdoor, except it opens sideways instead of up. And there's one more interesting thing I should tell you. A lot of these guns have a broken firing pin. This one did, and I bought a new one from therifleshop.com. And there's two different variations of this, so you might have to make sure you get the right one. But the reason for this is the firing pin, let's see, goes through here, and then it's L shaped. So this is the firing pin goes through here, and then it's L-shaped, and this L breaks off, and so it's very important that the end of the firing pin doesn't stick out too far, so there's not excessive force on that L. And it's also important that the headspace of the cartridge is correct. My cartridges, they seal on the end of the casing, but the original ones, they sealed or they seated on the rim, and they have a very, very unusually thick rim, and I think some of these 58 musket brass, they don't have the don't have the correct thickness of the rim, and that will cause some space between the back end of the casing and the front end of the mechanism here, and then that will kick back when you shoot, and then we'll put more force on the end of that firing pin, and that could probably be what's causing them to break more than the blow of the hammer itself. So if you're going to shoot with these, make sure that you don't expose that firing pin, L-shaped firing pin, to more force than necessary. Make sure it's got it's not too long, and make sure the headspace of the cartridges are correct, that it seats properly, and it doesn't have any room back and forth. So that's important. A lot of things you have to think about with these old guns, but that's kind of the fun of it, I guess. So that's it for now, and stay safe.